Laura, thanks for being on the program. I have been a fan of Grace's work for a number of years, and we often will use Grace as a resource on the stories that we write here at Ministry Watch. So when I heard there was new leadership at Grace or upcoming leadership, because just to clarify, you start in January, you and I are having this conversation in December, I was naturally interested. So thanks for being on the program. Welcome.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
So, Laura, let me start with kind of a big why question, which is why did you take this role? What is it about your background and about Grace's mission that you felt was compatible, synergistic?
Sure. So, my background, I come from the Christian community. My professional work has primarily been in clinical spaces, advocacy spaces, and particularly around better response and prevention of abuse in the faith communities, and which lines up very much with Grace's mission and the work that it does. I came from a ministry family. I'm well versed in um, ministry backgrounds. I grew up in a very conservative Christian community culture. And so in that time, I never really knew as I was being raised and growing up, and even early in my career, just what I didn't know about the impact of abuse and maltreatment in communities, what that meant, what that looked like, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And so as I started out in my career as a social worker, and I learned more about that, and I came to understand more about the necessity for the Christian community to know more, to respond differently, and that it has a resource like this out there, like Grace, to help it do that. I became so invested in the work and joined the board, was on the board for about 10 years. And then when this role came open after our dear friend, Pete Singer, died in the spring, was willing to put my name forward as a candidate for the position. It just really fit so well into the work that I was already doing, the work that I've been doing for so many years, but also just this lifelong a compelling call that the Christian community needs resources like this to respond faithfully and excellently to harm in its midst.
Well, just for the record, Pete has been on the podcast before. We had quoted him in a number of stories we've done over the years, and yeah, it's a huge loss. His passing was a huge loss, and I'm wondering, Laura, was I mean your description up until now, what I just heard, was kind of an evolution, and that this was consistent with your professional career on the board for 10 years and so on. But maybe backing up a little bit further, even, was there something in your early life or early professional life that either an incident in your counseling or social work career, or maybe in your personal life, that really made you say, this is important work and I want to dedicate my life to it?
Absolutely, yes. When I was in graduate school, so I went to graduate school for social work, and part of any social work degree program is field placement, which means we spend a year, sometimes 2 years, in the community, working with organizations, working with agencies that meet the needs that social workers would meet, and we spend an intensive period of time doing that as part of our training and our work, to prepare us to go into the field. And so the very first one of those that I did in graduate school was with a local child advocacy center and sexual assault response center here, in my local community. And it did everything from work with children and families after an allegation of abuse, to forensic interviewing, to therapy services with children and adults, to crisis response, to ER when sexual assault victims present themselves, to answering so I got quite a range of exposure pretty quickly and intensively to the nature of abuse, neglect, and sexual assault, and how it affects our community. And when I was doing that placement, that's when I realized I didn't know any of this. Growing up, I didn't know what I needed to know. And it struck me that why aren't why aren't Christian communities talking more about this? Why didn't I know? Why wasn't there a sense of the impact of this? Why wasn't it ever discussed in from the pulpit, or in larger settings, or publicly or privately? I was just blown away that all of this was happening in our community, and I didn't know. And I think at that time, something really grabbed a hold of me. And I just knew that I was going to spend a significant portion of my life making sure that the Christian community knows that this is an important thing for us to talk about. This is an important issue for us to engage with, that the harm of children and adults in this way is not acceptable, and that the faith communities which use theology and their beliefs to further create harm, to respond poorly, or to cover up these incidences, that is not acceptable, that is not okay, and that does not reflect what God wants for our communities.
Laura, when I think about grace, I think about a number of things. I think, for one thing, about thought leadership that you guys, provide, just sort of some standards or a way of thinking about this issue in the faith community. I think about specific interventions where, grace is called in because of a particular incident, and you guys might, speak directly into that situation. I think about, training that you guys do as well. Um, I guess my question for you is, what do you think is the core mission and deliverable, if I could put it that way, of grace? Is it intervening in particular situations and trying to bring healing and wholeness there? Is it trying to prevent? Do you see those two as not one or the other, but both and?
Certainly as a both and. Our mission as an organization is to empower the Christian community to recognize, prevent, and respond to abuse. So all of what Grace does fits into that mission. So we see that through the investigations and the responses that we're a part of, the assessments that we're a part of. That's the response piece, right? And then through the training and even some of the thought leadership considered prevention and awareness, you really can't do one without the other in this space, because constantly in our work, what we're seeing at Grace is we'll get a call from a church or an organization wanting to do a consultation about this, but what they really end up needing is an investigation, or they call us asking about an investigation, but they also need some help with training and policy work, or they just need a little bit of support to know what is the next step in this situation. So really for us, we really can't do one without the other, but also we acknowledge that, it would be awesome ultimately if our work wasn't needed, right? If if churches weren't responding poorly, if institutions were better equipped at the get-go, if people did know more and do differently, we wouldn't be needed, right? But both sides of those coin are important for us at Grace, so I would definitely say it's a both and.
So, talk to me a bit. Walk me through, if you will, quickly, a sort of a hypothetical, but probably fairly typical scenario, which is that I am a pastor, associate pastor, an elder, a deacon, someone in leadership in a church, and I have discovered that there is either sexual harassment or worse, sexual abuse that has taken place in my church, in my area of responsibility, and I need to make a phone call. I mean, what is my first call? Is it to law enforcement? Is it to you? Is it to my attorney? Um, Give some coaching to someone who is in that situation.
Sure. So, of course, one of the things that we always want to emphasize when we think about response is that the services that we provide do not replace any obligation to law enforcement reporting on criminal matters, especially in regard to mandated reporting and child protection. There are always going to be calls that need to be made outside of any work that we do with someone who asks for our support. So sometimes somebody calls us and they may not realize that obligation, they may not recognize that, or that situation may be very tricky and they may not know what is the first step. But if they reach out to us and set up a consultation, one of the first things we're going to ask is that if it is a reportable matter, has that report already taken place, or could we sort of point them in the direction of how to do that? Sometimes we end up having to make a report depending on the nature of what's shared with us as well. So reporting to law enforcement or child protective services, of course, depending on the situation, is always going to be one of the first things that we suggest. Now, as to sexual harassment in the particular scenario that you mentioned, again, depending on what might be present, there are a number of variables that would impact what direction we would say to take next. But our coaching and our consultation with churches is going to be around emphasizing safety first more than anything else. How can we prioritize the safety of those who have been harmed, the safety of those? And sometimes in these situations, there are multiple individuals under consideration for that, right? Making sure that the laws are followed around those concerns and those issues. And then we'll work with that individual to discuss, first of all, do you have policies in place that help you navigate this, or do those need to be strengthened? How do we follow those policies? And how do we engage in this situation in a trauma-informed way? So that I was hesitate to give very, very specific in the moment right now direction around here's what you do in that situation, other than to say report if there's something reportable, safety first, and then a lot of the other support that we give in consultations just really depends on the scenario. But we're there to help provide next steps. We can never tell someone what to do or force them to do that, but we can consult with them on what we think the next best practice would be.
So I really respect and appreciate your unwillingness to talk specifically into a situation. But what I am hearing though is that if in doubt, reach out, call. Right? I mean, you don't mind hearing from people who you know, if they're not sure what their next steps are. Right? You'll be happy to.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I would also say that it's normal to feel overwhelmed. You know, we do hear from a lot of pastors and ministry leaders and individuals who just say, we just don't know what to do. We're confused. We're overwhelmed. We're hearing, we're hearing advice from multiple fronts. We're feeling pressure from this or that. And we just need support to do that. So we are absolutely happy to talk with folks who reach out and ask for our support and guidance there. And sometimes those consultations turn into additional ways that we can support them through policy work and training, and sometimes assessments or investigations. But I just want to say, we know that it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for parents dealing with this within their families with their children. It's overwhelming for ministry leaders. It's overwhelming ultimately for survivors who are also wondering how can we encourage institutions to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Assuming, Laura, that you get paid and your staff gets paid. So given that, how do you get paid? Are y'all completely donor supported, or do you charge churches and ministries for your services, or is it a combination?
Yes, we have a combination of ways that our organization keeps its doors open. One of which is fee for service. So we have some free consultations that we do, and then depending on the level of need and level of training that it may be requested, there are paid services that we have to offer. All of our institutional response interventions are also fee for service as well, outside of an initial consultation. And then we have some grant funding and some donor funding as well. So really a mix of all of that, which is both tricky and also helpful depending on how you look at it. But it's a difficult time right now in nonprofit fundraising. I'm sure that you hear that from a lot of folks that you speak with about kind of how the nonprofit landscape looks like right now, especially faith-based nonprofits.
Yeah. Laura, I really did hear you loud and clear about your unwillingness to comment about specific situations. But I do want to ask you, I'm going to mention a couple of specific situations, not ask you to comment on them in particular, but to see if you might have any guidance for us on the issue. We've covered here at Ministry Watch a number of situations where there's been some uh, difference of opinion, shall we say, or conflict around definitions. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Not that I want you to comment on them, but I just want to give our listeners an example. The Ravi Zacharias, Lorianne Thompson situation that took place several years ago, where Lorianne Thompson was by some definitions, sexually abused by Ravi Zacharias, or at a minimum, sexually harassed. And there, a more recent situation with David Sills in the Southern Baptist Convention. Jennifer Lyles was sexually harassed slash abused. David Sills has maintained that it was an adulterous relationship. Jennifer Lyle, before she passed away, characterized it as abuse. And it's, for some reason, I mean, and I know the reasons, that has become a real controversy within the community. It's like, what constitutes, if these are mostly men in positions of power and authority, and women who are in a subordinate position, but often they're adults, they're grown-ups, they have agency in some cases. And I would say, since I met both Jennifer Lyle and Lorianne Thompson, I could say these are competent people. They're accomplished people in many ways. Is it abuse? Is it harassment? Is it just an adulterous relationship? Does Grace provide any guidance in those situations?
Yes. So Grace does provide guidance in those sorts of situations. And also recently on our podcast, we had an episode, I think split it even into two parts, about adult clergy sexual abuse, and highlighting some of the dynamics that you've mentioned that are often thrown up into question, whether that be on social media or just generally in the public eye. Whenever we think about adult clergy sexual abuse, or situations that folks have questions about related to consent, or what really happened here, I think one of the things that is important, as you've already mentioned, is to consider the power dynamic at work. As a practicing therapist, I am an adult, my clients are adults. There is agency that they do have, but by law, there are barriers around the nature of the relationship that I can have with my client to protect ultimately the client's well-being, right? I can't engage in particular levels of contact or relationship outside of the therapeutic space for a variety of reasons, but ultimately to protect that client and to protect that individual from harm that they may experience because of the imbalance of power. I'm always going to know more about my therapy client than they're going to know about me. I'm always going to have more information about their mental health that I have to steward that power very well when I hold that information in confidence, right? And so because there's that imbalance there, I have power that has to be so carefully considered. And that is one of the reasons why the laws are the way they are about professionals like myself, and why the rules of ethics that govern our professions are the way that they are. And so if we sort of translate that over, right, into clergy and into other scenarios where there is an imbalance of power, sometimes maybe not well recognized, depending on how people view that, it's very similar. There's reasons why individuals in a pastoral role or in a staff level role at a church just are inherently going to have more power than a parishioner in particular circumstances. And so the situations that you're bringing up, the cases that you're bringing up, oftentimes people really struggle to understand that power does play a role in consent, and also in how individuals even understand what's happening to themselves. And when we add in the weaponization of theology and of spiritual practices, that just adds another layer to what's happening there that makes that difficult. Additionally, understanding the dynamics of abuse, why people respond the way they do to what's happening to them in the moment, to the people who are perpetrating, is important for people to understand when we just generally look at, and often the public is evaluating, how survivors are responding. And often there's a lot of misunderstanding and mischaracterization of those responses that can lead people to doubt what's happened, the truth about what's happened. So there's a lot of education that's needed and continues to be needed, which is one of the reasons why we often offer some of the trainings that we do around what is a typical response, how does traumatic memory work, how does a survival response look in these situations, and why it's important to understand that in order for us to respond really, really well to survivors of abuse and neglect. So, Grace interacts, with training and offers training around that, but also can help churches understand more about the dynamics of some of these terms and why they can be so tricky for people to navigate in these settings.
That's helpful. Thank you, Laura. I want to come back to Grace particularly, and I want to remind our listeners and remind myself that you are brand new in this role, as we mentioned a few moments ago. That said, you also mentioned that you've been on the board for 10 years, and
Yes.
so I feel like I'm not being completely unfair to you to
Sure.
ask this next question, which is, what are your plans for Grace over the next 1 or 2 or 3 years? I mean, I know you're new. I know you've probably got some listening and learning to do. On the other hand, you've been at this for a while, and you didn't. I'm sure they didn't hire you because you didn't have anything on your mind, right? They hired you because you probably do have something on your mind. And
Mm.
so, what is that? Where are y'all going?
Sure. So again, as I mentioned before, like many others, 2025 in the nonprofit landscape has been challenging. It's been challenging for us here at Grace as well. As we look toward 2026, and I think about the team and all of the team's experience with the loss of their executive director in the last year, but also just the difficulty of the work. Stabilization for the team is really important, making sure that we have the resources that we need to do the work, and that we have the team that we need to do the work. And we have an incredible team. So I'm so grateful for all of their expertise and all of what they bring to this work. With this team and with the expertise that we have, I think that we are well positioned to continue what we're doing, but also with some innovation around how we engage the Christian community more broadly. So, our bread and butter for 21 years has been work in the conservative Christian evangelical community, and I think we'll always continue to do that. But the Christian community is bigger and broader than that. And so, and there is no Christian community exempt from the difficulties and the problems of navigating abuse and maltreatment of women, of children, of families, of individuals, of men. And so wherever there is a need in the Christian community, we want to be prepared to interact with that and to offer the support and the services that we have. So in addition to the circles and the communities that we've already been supporting, we're also looking to broaden that denominationally, not just in the U.S. but outside of the U.S., so that we can continue to do the good work that we're doing, but also to really expand the reach that we have organizationally. So I think you'll see that in the months and years to come. I sure hope so. Where we'll be looking at how does what Grace has to offer meet the needs that are very present in, whether it be the Protestant Catholic communities, or how can we partner even with other organizations like ours and other faith communities to strengthen this work and to strengthen the resources available to anyone asking for help. So that's maybe not quite specific enough in some ways, but I do see a broadening of what we're doing now. And in addition to that, hoping that we're going to see some innovation that comes with lower resources available to us than ever before, financially. And necessity is the mother of invention in a way. And we have a very creative team, fueled very much by the passion of what we do. And I'm excited for what's ahead.
Since you mentioned other organizations, I did want to ask you a question about the ecosystem in which you operate. As I mentioned earlier, we've been covering sexual abuse, sexual harassment um, issues for a good long while here at Ministry Watch. And, we encounter grace in that work. We encounter guidepost solutions. We've encountered advocates such as Rachel Thin Hollander and Krista Brown, Boz Shavigian, who I believe was the founder of Grace back in the day.
Correct. Yes.
But so Teresa Sidebotham out in Colorado Springs will be another one that we have been in touch with us. We've written some of the stories that we've done. How do you guys operate within that ecosystem? Are y'all competitive? Are you cooperative? Do you just do different things? And more to the point, how do you want to operate going forward in that ecosystem?
Hmm. So I would say in many ways, Grace is connected with the work of a lot of these other organizations, individuals within this system. So we, with the expertise that we have and the institutional response services that we offer and the safeguarding services, we're meeting some of the same needs that others are offering, but there are a few things that I would say sort of help us stand apart, whether that be between the seasoned multidisciplinary expertise that we have represented, in addition to our approach to trauma-informed care and trauma-informed analysis. We also offer theological analysis in our investigations and cultural analysis. So I think the kinds of things, when you get into the finer points of what we're doing, as we are connected with some of these other works as well, there's some things that we're offering that is slightly different. So when folks reach out to us and they say, what's the difference between what you do and what an attorney could do and all of that, we tend to emphasize that because there are some things that are different in what we offer. We also offer witness and survivor care and support as well. So in some ways, we're sort of a little bit of what a lot of these folks do. We have in one place. I think ultimately we understand that we can't meet all the needs, and nobody can. There's no advocate that can do it all. There's no attorney that can do it all. There's no organization that can do it all. And it is necessary for us to work collaboratively to meet the needs of the Christian community on a bigger level. We want to be humble enough to say that's the case. We all have a role to play, but we also want to be clear about the principles that we have around this work. And what's important to us is to focus on our mission, and that coming first, and then seeing how opportunities arise for us to partner, collaborate with, and to interact with others without sacrificing both what we believe our calling in this is and the quality of what we have to offer along the way. But advocates are so important. Attorneys certainly play a role as well. And we know that so many of the survivors that we've spoken with and the institutions that we've worked with have benefited greatly from a range of what's out there to help support them in circumstances that are difficult to navigate.
Laura, you've already answered partially the question that I'm about to ask you, but kind of just winding up here, I'd like to ask this question and maybe get you to say some of the things that you said before in summary, or maybe to introduce any new ideas that you might have on your mind. But as I've already mentioned, you and I are having this conversation in the very end of 2025. You're going to start officially your role next month. Let's imagine that we're having this conversation a year from now.
Okay.
And December of 2026. And we're looking back on the year, not looking forward. What do you hope you can tell me you got done during this year? What would make 2026 a good year for you and for Grace?
Well, and to the wording that you just used, I would say I don't know that it's going to be me getting it done, but our team is outstanding, and I think there's a lot of good work in front of us for us to do together, and our board as well. I think I'd like to continue to see us consistently engage theologically with um, why Christian communities have such a difficult time recognizing and responding to abuse, and how we can consistently and continually meet that theological engagement. One of our founding board members, Victor Vies, talks about how, the answer to bad theology is good theology, right? And so as we're entering maybe some new spaces, just remembering along the way that there is no corner of the Christian community that is untouched by abuse and neglect. And as long as we're engaging with that theologically and helping them understand that we're on a good track. So I think a year into the future, I'd like to see us continue with consistency in what we already do really well. I'd like to see us having expanded a little bit more into some of these other parts of the Christian community that we haven't had before, connect with denominational leaders. I'd like to see us explore opportunities at an international level to help us take the good work that we're already doing and do even more of that along the way. It's the work that we're doing is also long, slow work. I think sometimes when we think about what does it mean to interact with this, what does it mean to do that, it's long and slow relationship building. It's consistently showing up in places and spaces where people are looking for safety and belonging. And it's living out the calling that we have with faithfulness. And so, even though there are things that we hope for our future and that we want to see in the next year, it's also important for us to remember that this is the long-term haul that we have with the Christian community, the long-term engagement that we have with this, and doing that really well is just as important as any one big goal or two here and there.
Laura, thank you so much for being on the program. Pray the Lord flourishes your work in the year ahead, and look forward to chatting with you again.
All right. Thanks so much, Warren.